I want to reach out to everybody and say thank you for attending the second of our discussions about Energiesprong. My name is Adam Cohen, and I am with Passive Buildings Canada. And we've assembled a group of people to finish this discussion about financing and Energiesprong in the Canadian context. We have Peter Amarongen, who spoke last time, as did Daniel DeCare from Ottawa and Mark Carver from NR Canada. Jeff Armstrong is another longtime low energy person. He's from Ottawa. Welcome to the broadcast, and we're going to try to make this a strict no longer than 1 hour seminar. And so without any further ado, I'd like to jump right into our first question. And our first question, Daniel, if you could read the question, Daniel's going to address this initially, and then we'll talk about it.
So we were going to go into the financing last time, and the question that was in there was, how do we find the money to guarantee the market for people investing in this, not just the early adopters that we're having now? And so I can show my screen now. Perfect. So I believe everybody can see the screen. So the financing question is there.
Yep.
And I'm going to take a shot at explaining how we at OCH, how I ended up needing to justify this particular project. And the simple way of approaching it is that when we're dealing with a deep energy retrofit like this, we're going to need to spend money in these buildings regardless over the next couple of years, over the next several years. In fact, like, we should be looking at a 20, 30, maybe even 50-year horizon in terms of how much money we will be spending in that community. So specifically for the prefabricated exterior energy retrofit in Ottawa, we looked at the capital repair plan for that community for the next 20 years. And you can see on the screen now, I believe everybody can see. We're looking at things like foundation and brick repair, exterior cladding we were going to spend anyways, window repairs, sealant and sills, main door replacements, back door replacements, roof replacements, water heaters, furnaces, even distribution panels. You can see the years that they were anticipated. And that was for the entire community, because it's hard to drill down to the exact unit, but you can make an argument that over the next 20 years, we're going to be spending $30,000 in every single one of these units. And then when we say, well, why don't we do all of that work up front? So if we take the net present value of that and say we're going to spend $30,000 this year, and then we're going to add the savings that we'll get from bringing this particular unit, these units to net zero. So basically, if we're saving $1,500 a month or something like that, we can go and get an extra $30,000, maybe even $40,000 of financing, if you will, by saying here are the savings that we're going to get from this type of retrofit. So in that way, we can kind of build together a justification that if we spend $60,000, $80,000 on this type of work, then we are going to be ahead of the game. Definitely that is not where this technology is right now. Our retrofit is definitely going to be more expensive than this, but this is the approach that I took with our finance team, saying we need a solution for this, and here's how much money at least we anticipate being able to justify. And as right now the question is, how do you close the gap between what it currently costs and what the market would tolerate, which was essentially just be your deferred maintenance with your energy savings. And I've put up a couple of options right now on the screen that we're looking at for our portfolio, which include CMHC's co-investment fund, which in order to access, you need to have a certain percentage of GHG savings. I know that FCM is also looking at a new social housing framework to support projects like this through their Green Municipal Fund. So there's definitely some government organizations or some large national organizations that are looking at supporting that transition, maybe filling that gap, as we say. I think we also need some level of carbon pricing, some sort of the carbon auctions essentially that we had in Ontario until the government change were there to sell carbon credits, and social housing was actually getting the proceeds from those auctions to go and do projects that were saving further GHGs that were then sold back to the government, which put them on auction again, generating more funds. And so you've got a little bit of that circular economy, if you will. that also helped bridge some of that gap. So that is hopefully another option, because eventually you are, or you can go with the Energiesprong method. What they did in Netherlands is essentially just go with a full ESCO model, an energy service contract that basically said, hey, we don't want to spend any money on this. We will keep our current utility rates and we'll just pay you, and you have to guarantee a certain performance. But definitely the economies of scale is how we're going to shrink the gap. Right now, when we're looking at doing 4 units, we're definitely high above that 80,000 per unit mark. But hopefully, as we talk about thousands of these and we bundle them all together in the same area with the same kind of like same topography, same template of building, we're talking about being able to chop off a third to half of the cost, and therefore shrink that gap to make it more and more reasonable.
Thank you, Daniel, for preparing that, and thank you for talking us through. I'm not clear. This 28,000 number you have here on the that's for how many units? Is that for all of OCH's projects?
No, so the total column was for 495 units.
195.
So, which is the entirety of what we call Overbrook Low Rent 1, 2, 3, 6. Just some naming conventions from when they were built. And then I simply divided it per unit, right? Like, this is extremely high level. It's trying to come up with how do you get to an evaluation of how much you're going to spend. And we're working with NRCan right now to try and come up with a more structured method of producing those more predictable costs, figuring out what the total cost of building ownership is. Can we build in the GHG cost into that? Because that's something that I haven't spoken about at all. We're just talking about the repairs as well as the energy savings, but there would be a huge additional financing piece if we had some sort of carbon pricing as well.
Yeah, and that I guess when just the experience that we had in Retrofit New York, or are having, from the very first day that we started talking about this, one of the leaders in this was saying that, this is a really simple problem to solve if we would just value greenhouse gas reduction, right? So I think the bottom line is, how long will it take us to have the political will in Canada to make this something that we value as a society to bring forward? And I guess that's a political question more than anything. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's it. Like those carbon auctions that I was describing, you could put that exact same model out there once again, and we would have finance. We would add probably, maybe $20,000-$40,000 to each project of justified GHG savings that we can monetize, and then go after the funding in that approach.
Right. And Mark, are you aware of anything on the national level working towards this?
It's a good question. So Dan highlights a few of the different pots of federal money that could be potentially leveraged for this kind of work. I think that with the national housing strategy that's being led by CMHC, I think it's a great potential opportunity. I know that the national housing strategy is targeting retrofits to up to 240,000 units of social housing. And that's a bit of a segue perhaps into one of the other questions that we got about where is the market for this? And I think that is the catalyst to market, just like in the Netherlands, because we know there's such a demand in our social housing stock. In terms of other funding pots, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Green Municipal Fund is the other one that Dan has indicated here, specifically for social housing. And we know that in the latest speech from the throne, that there were other commitments, and we expect that there are going to be other funding pots for retrofit coming down the line. The details of those, though, are not yet known.
So I guess one of the issues here is that we're kind of in Canada right now in this pilot phase with our 3 projects: the Edmonton project, the Ottawa project, and then the BC project. But in order to start to scale the industry, quote, scale the industry, I mean, 3 is a pretty small one to start from, so it shouldn't be hard to double that scale, right? There to me, one of the obstacles is that in order to get entrepreneurs to really start thinking about how to address this in really creative ways, we have to get beyond the kind of burning soul part of the entrepreneur. So I think we're kind of in this phase right now of the people that are doing this really want to do it and are doing it in a way that is quite passionate and also not not looking towards anything more than let's prove we can do this and let's do it as best we can and let's all work for almost nothing and try to make this happen and because this is the right thing to do. And it's kind of similar to the way the passive house community started in North America. There was just a few people kind of really passionate, putting a lot of energy and effort and money into trying to get it off the ground. And what happened in the passive house community was that other people started seeing the success of what we were doing early on, who were losing money and working their tails off, and started saying, "Oh, this has a future." And then entrepreneurs started jumping in, and we started seeing creative people make this much more affordable, much more accessible. So it's not hard to see the passive house market in new construction because it's not that hard to get from existing code to a ultra low energy building with very little outlay of money. Here we have kind of a different strategy we have to think about, and this is the really tough one, is that in today's current environment with energy, the cost of energy, and today's current environment with funds available, the real question is how do we get these pots of money actually there so that when somebody wants to do a program like this or wants to do a renovation to net zero, those funds are there and secure enough so that entrepreneurs would feel comfortable investing in experimentation, research, and creating new systems, processes, products, et cetera, that they feel good in investing their funds to get us to that next level. So, this is really one of these open questions that I guess I'm gonna hopefully we'll have some more information on this, because to me this is really the nut of the problem. I really don't feel like technically there's a lot of challenge here. I mean, I think we all know how to do this. We all have a pretty good vision of where we can go. There's a ton of smart people around that can help bring the cost down. But until we really have that kind of funding pot, until we have that pool to dip from that anybody can dip into that wants to get there, I think we're going to face headwinds with entrepreneurs. So I guess it's one of those things where it's going to take time, and that's the one thing we don't have much of. So I guess we'll just continue to apply ourselves and start hopefully trying to think our way creatively through the money on this stuff. Peter, Jeff, Mark, anybody want to address anything before we go on to the next question?
Yeah, I was just going to say in response to what you just said, Adam, I think that the good news, like I agree that certainty of funding is critical, but it's even more critical if there was a very large capital investment required to get involved in doing this kind of work. And I really don't think there is. I think it's a fairly modest capital investment required to get set up to do offsite fabrication of components that can be used in this kind of retrofit work. So just a note, in case people are thinking that it requires hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up an automated shop. It's just not the case. You really need a long shed and some good lighting and the ability to lift heavy panels off a table, and there's not a tremendous amount to it. And I would agree. I think that technically, I think we've solved this problem technically in one way or another already. The one piece that we're probably the least familiar with is the whole building capture piece. Doing laser scanning and converting a laser scan into a reliable document that could be used to build components offsite. That's the more mysterious piece of this process. But everything around the building science, I think in one way or another, you could pick up the phone and find somebody who knows as much about it as there is to know.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I agree, none of it is rocket science, but the it's pretty intricate. The margins are really tight, and you've got to do, you need to be extremely efficient to make it affordable. And that's only going to come with experience, with doing it over and over. And I'm confident that there's already enough demand for. We don't need very many projects at this stage. We don't have the capacity, but if we make the leap of faith and start, there will be enough. There are enough projects to let us figure this out well enough, and hopefully, as we get it figured out, the demand will grow, and the capacity and the demand will kind of converge, and we'll get those scaled up. But it's going to be hard to get entrepreneurs to come in this. People who are only motivated by the money are not going to be attracted by the margins that are here now. And in a way, that's not a bad thing. I think until we get it really figured out and rolling, I don't think we need a huge number of people kind of running around. We could waste a bunch of money by throwing money at it.
With that being said, let's move on from financing. We hope to have some more information on financing in the next 5 or 6 months. We're going to start working on that and see if we can crack that nut, because that seems to be the biggest nut that we need to figure out. Let's see. So the next question. Okay, so this is the first one here. The first question is the impacts of Canadian geography on achieving economies of scale for prefabrication and ideas how to manage this. So this is something that I wanted to discuss specifically because through my role as an Edmund Hillary Fellow in New Zealand, we have very similar issues that we're studying in New Zealand as we're studying in Canada, in that we have a very, very large land area compared to the population density. So we're not Europe. You couldn't set up a massive factory in the Netherlands and expect to be shipped all over Europe with hundreds of millions of people within driving distance. So what we're exploring here in New Zealand is the idea of setting up an atelier of intellectual property. So rather than all the various different people that want to service the different markets having their own IP that each one patents and protects and tries to make a million in their little sector, what it is an atelier that was made up of small producers, kind of like Jeff pointed to in his comment, people, because there isn't a lot of cost to start up one of these plants, especially the way we're doing it initially. The idea is to you start with a plant or two that are servicing a small local area, and then what happens is as that plant goes through its first generation of jigs and machines or whatever they're doing to start to automate the process, as we get another person from another region that wants to start up, that person signs onto a compact that agrees to share their IP and their innovation, and they get from that they get all the information that we've been able to gather up to that point. That information is then shared with them openly. Technical advice is given. We then give them not only technical advice, but this is what we would do different for the next generation, so that when they start to build their version of the plant, they're doing the second generation, say, of whatever the first generation has discovered. And the idea is, at least here in Aotearoa, is to have plants servicing about every 300 kilometers to 400 kilometers. That's the kind of the idea. And this is not around retrofit, this is around new construction, but it's a similar kind of concept. So the idea is to try to keep the innovation going. So what happens in my mind is that when you have the typical kind of IP protection that we have in North America, where you protect your IP, you keep everybody else away from it. At first, you're very innovative, but what happens is after you've established yourself, your innovation tends to level off, because that innovation starts, if you innovate too fast, you can innovate right out of your market. So the actual speed of innovation slows down when IP is protected. My theory is that if IP is shared in this kind of almost like cellular way, where it kind of goes and to all different areas, that intellectual property that you start off with in this area and then is given, say, to one or two other people, and then they innovate, and that feeds back to you. Then all three of you, maybe there's another two or three that start, and that third generation is then started, rather than years between when you make a plant and upgrade a plant. It can be a kind of an exponential innovation curve, in that the more people that are actively getting out on the edge, getting the latest technology, innovating, finding ways to do things different, the quicker we can innovate our way out of that. So this is a pretty radical concept in terms of sharing, rather than protecting. But one of the things about an earth that is a healed earth or a regenerative earth is that it's an earth of abundance, and part of abundance is to eliminate scarcity. And the IP, as we currently practice it in North America, creates scarcity, right? Because what we're doing, we're saying, I've got this and you can't have it. And that's creating, so we need to create abundance. We need to create a kind of circular feedback loop where we're all spiraling up together. And that's kind of my pie in the sky wish for the way that we would approach this. And for Canada, it seems that, we have such similarity. We have population centers where we could have larger or more factories, but we've got a lot of centers where you can go out and build. If you could get a factory started for $100,000 or $150,000, or like Jeff says, just in a shed with some good light and a lifting machine, we could theoretically, really start to make this something that we can move out and roll out all over Canada. So that's my 2 cents. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, I totally agree, and that's one of the. That's really the foundational idea behind Retrofit Canada, is to become an open sharing of information, where we put up case studies of successful projects and how they did it, complete with cost information and as much information as people are willing to share. And we're going to start that with the Sundance project and some single family retrofits that we have here. And we're hoping that by kind of exemplifying this generosity, that will inspire other people to do the same in the same spirit, and that we can make these really fast leaps where people can learn from each other very quickly. And already we've got a guy in Halifax who's trying to start doing this, who's talking to Efficiency Nova Scotia, who we've been sharing information with extensively, and I'm very hopeful that he'll he'll get going, get some traction. He's really got the fire and the background. He's passive house trained, and he's working with good people there.
Good.
How about this? Maybe on the OCH side, like our fabrication facility is a 20 by 30 slab with 2 sea containers on either end as walls, and then some prefabricated trusses that sit on top of those sea cans to give ourselves a roof, and then a big giant front door on the front. So you want to talk about, and then the most technology we've got is that nice manufacturing table where we can also take out the middle of the table so we can cut windows and doors through it. But and then some rigs, you need to make sure those trusses can carry and lift up a wall and then move it sideways. But what we just described there is, around $10,000 worth of setup cost to make the first iteration. Definitely, there's probably improvements that can be made. And if you were making 100, if you're going through 100 units, you'd probably do it a little bit different. But the upfront cost, definitely, I would hope, is not going to be the inhibitor. It's more about, if you ask me, it's logistics. Even right now on this one project, figuring out when you dig the trenches to get to the foundation, but you've also got your gas meters that you're going to be eliminating, but you need to keep them around long enough to supply hot water until the day you're ready to switch over. So you got to make sure your electricity, which is currently overhead, which is now going to be underground, needs to be ready for that day of the switchover. But that also needs to happen before you add your your load-bearing beam on the first floor, so you can bring in your panels to sit on top of it. And then, right, like it's more about that lovely game of logistical Tetris. because the technical solution has been brought forward. It's just in what order do you put the pieces together?
Sure, sure.
I think that's really true, but I think it's also a little bit dangerous to focus too much on the panels, because as it turns out, in our Sundance retrofit anyway, the panels are in the neighborhood of 15% of the total cost. Like, most of it is in other stuff, especially the odds and ends around the building. It's appalling how small that amount is, and it also suggests that the cost savings in terms of driving this down is going to be driven more by on-site efficiencies than by cheaper panels.
Right, right. That makes
Yeah,
a lot of sense.
just to pick up on that a little bit further, when Mark and I started a few years ago with the peer research project, and we sat back and thought deeply about, who are the best candidates to manage the prefabrication aspect of it. It's kind of natural to think of this more in terms of prefabrication. So your mind goes immediately to people who make panels for a living. Should we be talking to them about taking on this work? And what we've discovered, just as Peter has articulated, is that the panels are really a small piece of the puzzle on the one hand, and sort of the broad nature of these projects is they really lend themselves to being problem solved by general contractors, as opposed to problems being solved by people who build panels for a living. Because there are, as Dan says, there's electrical to redo. There are all sorts of site-related things. There's lots of preparation to the building that has to be done. And I think more philosophically, I think general contractors are used to solving a different problem every time they go out, right?
Yeah.
Every project is different. And that's what's required as a kind of mindset. And your company infrastructure, I think, needs to be able to manage that kind of difference between the job you're doing and the last job you did. Whereas people who manufacture something for a living, they want to do the same thing every time out if they can. And so it's a very different mindset. And we've discovered that, and that's good news, I think, because small general contractors who are looking to expand their base and maybe grow their business, this is a huge opportunity for them, because they're already familiar. If they're in business after 2 or 3 years, they already know how to roll with all these punches, and are probably very good candidates to solve this problem. And the panels can be brought in and modified to suit a particular circumstance. But the people to do that, we found, is more likely to be a general contractor.
Yeah, the thing that I focused on in Retrofit New York that seemed to dovetail with what you're just saying, Jeff, is it seems to me the intermediate solution, right in the short term, is to almost, if you will, think about the vinyl siding industry. The guy rolls up on a truck, or the person rolls up with a truck. They've got a brake, and they've got the vinyl siding, and they've got all the various parts and pieces that they might need to go around windows, to go around electrical outlets, to deal with corners, to deal with out of plumb stuff. And they cut and paste and kind of put it right on the building, and that eliminates a lot of the preliminary measuring and creating of panels and bringing the panels out and erecting them. It seems to me that when we started looking in Retrofit New York at kind of what was the existing technology that we were trying to come below, right? The existing technology for this is just wrap it in a sweater, right? Just kind of stick on insulation, put a render on the outside of the insulation, and you've airtight it underneath that. So to me, we were dealing in numbers to get, a 150 mil insulation on the outside of some of these buildings. They were running us $16 to $20 a square foot installed, and the panel numbers we were getting were $75 a square foot and up. And so to me, it seems like, and this kind of dovetails into the ramping up local production supply of high performance building products. That's our second question. is that maybe one of the things we need to be thinking about is approaching this problem differently, where rather than creating so much focus on the panels, we should be thinking about a suite of products that can be site modified, and that will eliminate a lot of that front end measuring and drawing and shop drawings and creating a panel and shipping out the panel and putting it on. I mean, if you could roll up with a tractor trailer, even if or with a small truck, even if it maybe the sides flip up and it creates and then it has then plastic sides that come down, and you create yourself a little shop right there. You pull up to your building and you just do your retrofit right there. You go out, you measure, you stick, you look, and maybe that's the way to go. I don't know. I'm just asking. What do you guys think about that?
Hey, I've got some thoughts on that as well. I think that our housing stock is so heterogeneous that there are always going to be certain projects where some sort of site-built solution is going to be required, and you're going to need that flexibility. I think the real promise of this sort of prefabricated or a panelized approach is where you've got a lot of repetition and simple architectural forms. And so I imagine seeing both solutions rolling out in parallel. Certainly the focus of our project so far has been on a panelized solution, because I think that if we want to sort of, to whatever degree possible, standardize a solution and take advantage of offsite construction and the potential that advantages that it offers, that's what we have to look towards. And I was encouraged, we just had a meeting yesterday where we looked at different segments of the housing stock and what vintages would be most best suited for this kind of approach. And I think that's going to be a big piece of work that we need to look at. But certainly it was one of the reasons why again, we identified social housing as a really great candidate and catalyst market for this type of approach, where you have a lot of repetition in the stock, tend to be more simple buildings architecturally, and could lend themselves better to this industrialized approach. The other big advantage of that is we know we have a skilled labor shortage already across the industry, and that's only projected to continue to grow. So getting skilled trades on site who are familiar with all of the different details that you're going to encounter in a site-built solution is going to be challenging. If you can solve those ahead of time, I think that's the only way we're going to meet the scale of this challenge.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that, Mark, is the notion that or the promise that prefabrication will be, if you build stuff off-site, you reduce the amount of time you spend on-site, and so you reduce the disruption to the building occupants. And that's particularly important when it comes to social housing, because people who live in social housing often have fewer options in terms of where they could relocate while the work's being done. They've got to stay there. So anything we can do to reduce the amount of time we're in their way, the better it is.
That's absolutely true. Although, one of the things that was interesting in the Energiesprong, when I visited with some folks that lived in social housing and went through the process, was that while it is true, it took them 2 to 3 weeks to finish the project in terms of actual working days. What would happen is at least at this one project that I spoke to the people that actually lived there, was they came out very early on and did all the laser scanning. Then they came back and did a bunch of demolition work that they needed to finish the laser scanning. Then they came back and did more some of the interior work, like the bathrooms and kitchens and stuff. And then they came back and did the panels, because there was a lag between when they shot the laser and when the panels were ready. So the whole process, although it only took, quote, 2 to 3 weeks, it lasted almost 6 months from the time that they first came out on site to the time they were done. So to me, what I heard very clearly from the folks I talked to that were living there was they felt disrupted, even if they weren't, just the fact that the buildings were kind of torn apart and there were, targets stuck on the building, and they knew that they had more stuff coming. So it's maybe a bit of education too for residents to understand that when, it doesn't mean that we're going to be in and out in 5 days out of your place, right? There's a process that goes on, and we don't want to oversell the quickness of the prefab. Peter, I think you spent on your first project on your duplex, was it 30 days
No, we were more
on
like
total
3 months,
construction?
but we were building the panels on site, and we could only go one floor at a time because of limited room. And we were not, and at one point, early on, we had a very small crew. We needed to be deliberate and thoughtful about it, and record what we were learning, and make sure that we figured it out. Throwing labor at it would not have helped. It had to be really thoughtful. So we were about 3 months on the first duplex. We're anticipating being more like 5 weeks on the next 3-unit building, and hitting a pace of about a building a month after that.
We're looking at probably
Go ahead,
being
Daniel.
on site between the new servicing we have to do to the mechanical work to the new roof to the we're looking like 4 months, but we'll be 1 month doing the panelization, and the other 3 months are the other bits and pieces.
And we've completely, when we did the pilot, we were in and out of those units dozens of times. We've looked at that, and we think we can come up with a scenario where we do multiple things at once, where we did the HRV retrofit separate from the windows. So we're going to try to shorten that window from the first day that we come in their house to the last day when the paint is drying, and get that as short as possible, which we hope can be under 2 weeks.
Good. Well, I want to be mindful of time. We've got about 20 minutes, and let me just move on down through the questions if you guys don't mind. The impacts on Canadian geography on building capacity to support this work. I think we kind of discussed that in that first one. And if anybody, we can just move on to the next one. Where is the market? Is there a market? And how to and who will aggregate the early movers to create a viable market beyond subsidized demonstrations? Well, I think we addressed that in the first question, because right now we're trying to just we're in the early bleeding edge market, testing the technology, and there is no market right now, honestly, if you really look at it, because nobody else is in this space, and we're needing government funds to help us even begin this. So the market is a future market that we all see. It's massive. I mean, in Canada, we have so many buildings that are aging out and ready for renovation, and so this is going to be a pretty major effort, I think, more than almost anything else. I want to say politically, to get the population to value this. If we don't value this as a people, then we will not do this. We have to create a better future for our children, and if we don't really bring that into our hearts and really embrace that as a society, we're just going to continue to beat our head against a market that only thinks of dollars. One of the nice things that's kind of interesting about creating the market here in New Zealand is that the New Zealand government is trying to switch to wellness accounting, where their accounting is not just, their government accounting is not just around GDP and employment rate, but also considers like health, wellness, and physical wellness. And there's a lot of other factors that they're now looking in the way they make their decisions as a society. I don't know that that's a right or wrong way to go. I'm just mentioning that, there are forward-looking politicians that are thinking beyond just, dollars and cents. And I think at this point, we got to be really smart, but we got to use our hearts a lot stronger than we have in the past, because that's, I think, really what's going to get us out. There's a question about importing U.S. assembled components into Canada for demonstration, commercialization, challenges, solutions, and pathways. Well, I can tell you from working in the retrofit market, I mean, we're actually importing some of our solutions from Canada back the other way. So, I think with North America and with our closeness with the U.S., if there are products out there that make sense, we can look at it. But honestly, there's not a lot going on in the United States. It's not also going on in Canada. I mean, we're also very, very early in the process in the U.S. All the retrofit pilot projects, the Realize project, the retrofit New York projects. They're just kind of they're all just dipping our toes in the water. So there aren't that many products to really choose from. Now, if I'm wrong, or you can, does anybody else want to speak to that?
Well, the raw materials that we're using are readily available across the country. They're just as available in the U.S. as they are here. And the finished product is so bulky that shipping at any distance is going to get expensive. So I really don't think it's an issue that's likely to arise unless somebody invents something amazing.
Yeah, like a spray on 2 mil thick paint that is, R40.
Exactly. I've been working on that
native
on
mushrooms.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that on one hand, it's a bit of a challenge, but that we took a very explicit, we made an explicit effort when we started working with Jeff early on in our project to try and adapt panel designs that already exist in the marketplace, and that there are supply chains that are well established for right across the country. So, using a modified wood frame panel and a modified structural insulated panel. In essence, so that wasn't a major barrier right out of the gate. Of course, there are lots of different panel permutations and designs that could be imagined, it could be evolved and improved upon. But the idea there is starting with panel types that existed in the market, and are widely available, was a real explicit intent. And I don't see necessarily a need to import a lot of expensive European or US manufactured products necessarily to do this type of work. That's going to add a lot of complexity and time and embodied energy to these projects that doesn't necessarily have to happen, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think we got plenty. It's all so simple, it really is. And Pete, Daniel, are you finding kind of similar to what Peter's found, that the actual percentage cost of the panels is quite small compared to the entire project?
Well, so if we're just talking like the materials, right? Like out of the like $700,000 of the entire project, we've got $40,000 worth of the raw materials, and then there's going to be the labor to assemble. And I mean, so yes, we're in that same ballpark, that the materials are available, they're here. We did end up importing we were looking for a specific structurally insulated panel because of the structural concern for our building. We did actually end up importing it from the States, just because that's the company that had the closest company that had that certification. But you could find the exact same, essentially the same SIPS panel, not without that certification, that's locally manufactured. We're using locally manufactured windows in our project, as well as doors. So the materials don't need to come from very far.
Good. Okay, well, we got a little over 10 minutes left, and this is a question for Dan. If you could kind of take this one. In Europe, they are doing retrofits by adding 1 or 2 stories on 3 or 4 story existing buildings. The additional stories are constructed from prefab CLT. Extra revenue from rent or sale for these extra stories covers energy retrofit for the entire building. Have you come across this in your research experience? This model seems to fit the affordable housing retrofit both in Europe and possibly here as well. Just a quick comment on that. There are pilot programs that I've heard about in the States that are doing similar kind of things, mostly around new construction, where you get like an extra floor if you do low energy. I haven't heard about it yet in renovation, although I wouldn't be surprised if somebody's exploring it. There are all kinds of issues around suitability of foundations and structural ability to add additional floors that make things difficult. But Daniel is going to address that specifically because they looked at this in detail on the Ottawa project. So Daniel, go ahead.
So included as part of, I put risk mitigation at the top of this in terms of why we're looking at these kind of deep energy retrofit, because we have a project just down the street that is looking at a similar build. So our so Prince Albert project is actually the exact same unit, two end units, so it's a duplex rather than a fourplex. Where we are planning on taking, that is a Google Street View of its current, how it is right now. It's a duplex, where we're looking at adding units on the back. So we're trying to avoid those foundation issues that you were talking about by not adding it on top of, but in fact going to the back, adding a whole new foundation and adding a whole 2 extra units to the same area where we're only getting 2 units worth of rent. We will now be getting 4 units worth of rent. And that actually links to the financing question. So if we're not going to be able to reach or part of the transition, or a way of closing the gap, if you will, on that financing piece is, well, there's not quite enough, or maybe our GHG pricing isn't quite good yet. So if we densify that same property while we are doing that exterior energy retrofit, maybe we can bring it to a closer financial feasibility faster. So in this project, we will be taking the brick off of this entire building, and then adding 2 extra units on the back, and adding a building envelope that will go all the way around. So we will be getting that extra energy performance. We will be getting those extra units as part of this project, and we're also going to be adding solar panels on the roof, as you can see, which will give us a good kick at the can in terms of the energy performance, but also getting that extra rental revenue, which is going to be making that the financing of this project a lot more attractive, because the extra rentals are much more tangible for our finance department than the energy savings are right now with the way that we're doing our accounting. So definitely there's room for a better way of accounting for all of the revenues that we're going to be getting from these types of retrofits. But the densification model is also one that we'll be testing out literally in the same month to a few blocks down the street from the Pure project. And we're hoping to compare both methods and show where some might be applicable. If maybe you don't have the room to add the units, maybe you just do the retrofit, but where you do have the room to add the units, maybe it's an opportunity to make the financing more attractive.
Does anybody know about any provinces or localities that are discussing retrofit densification with higher performance? I know Vancouver has some perks for going with higher performing. Mark, do you know?
No, I don't know any specifics. I know that in one of the advisory committee calls for Pembina's upcoming initiative, that was raised as a potential issue. In a way, because we know that the business case for doing this is going to be more challenging in Canada, probably across North America, than it is in Europe, just because of the cost that we pay for our energy. So it was one of the ideas in terms of adding densification and helping to solve the affordable housing crisis in some of these markets as a way to also help offset some of the cost. And I think those are great. And I think actually looking at that as part of the business case it will be really important. A potential downside is that it also, and I'm sure Dan would be able to speak to this, but it complicates the project too, on the other hand. And there is of course, the structural issues that you mentioned, Adam. Right. Yeah, keeping tenants in place. Also, it's going to be a more site-specific solution. So we're talking about a less standardized solution, which is going to mean it's going to have to require design for that specific site. It's going to complicate permitting. In BC, a big issue is seismic performance as well. And so adding additional mass to the building is going to be a real challenge in seismic zones. So on one hand, I think it's a great thing to explore. It's not something we've looked into as part of our project, but there will probably be some creative opportunities to increase density while tackling some of these objectives.
Are there any final thoughts anybody would like to give us before we say goodbye to everybody and thank everybody?
I just want to make one comment on Dan's last slide there with the building being added to the back. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, that additional new construction is also going to be panelized, is it not? Is it not going to be built off-site?
Right now, the plan is to go more the wood frame construction against the existing building and just build it out around. Or there is, you're correct, there is an option that we're considering, but whether we go that way is not 100% sure yet.
I see. But it is a comment that I've heard from people that we've talked to regarding panelized retrofit, is that once they get tooled up to do retrofit work, they suddenly discover that the same components they're building lend themselves to new construction as well. And there's some real benefit to that. And it can be part of the justification for making whatever level of investment is required in the shop.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment, Adam, back on question number 4 about where the market is and is there a market? You know, I think one of the things that's so important about the European example and about Energiesprong and what's made it successful is that there were these explicit market development teams and who worked with the housing providers to actually identify the units, figure out what makes a good candidate building, and to actually get those soft commitments from the housing providers to move ahead with this. And I think that's a critical piece that we're going to need here too. And it's something that the Pembina Institute is positioning itself to do, which is fantastic. Right across the country, it will be really great to see that sort of market development piece. You know, we're trying with our project to at least start with some of the supply side of the equation in terms of solution supplied, but the demand side is probably even more important, and starting to develop that market potential is going to be critical.
Yeah, absolutely. We need a bunch more OCHs, right?
Well, we're hoping to be a good case study, and we're hoping to share it as much as possible, because we are definitely not the only ones out there, but we do have, like, the reason we're looking at both of these options is because we have thousands of townhomes that are over 50 years old, that are at a point in their tipping point in their life cycle, that if we don't make some kind of investment, it's not strategic, we could lose housing units in the next 10 to 15 years. So that's why we're doing it.
And Peter, do you have anything you want to add as we wrap up?
I don't think so. This is a great discussion. I'm glad it's being recorded, because there are a bunch of people I would like to hear some of the comments that were made.
I had some comments come in. I just
Sarah.
wanted 3 seconds. So one question was, is anyone familiar with the MEETS approach from Seattle and the opportunity to engage in local PUC and deep energy retrofits? There was a mention of Mike Carver's sweet coffee mug. Then there was Manitoba's Sun Certified Buildings is doing an ES style approach to retrofits, big exclamation mark. So make it a 4 pilot project. And then the last one was, do the speakers see any limitations, challenges, and advantages with applying Energiesprong to mid to high rise? I kind of answered for you, saying it's an awesome idea. Most social housing in Toronto is towers, you know, the tower retrofit thing and that sort of thing, and how we tackle that. I think that's just a no-brainer, but that's just me, and I'm only the technical support. And I'm going to now mute myself so you can talk for 5 more minutes or so, and we will maybe do this again. Bye.
Just on that, the tower
Right.
aspect. So half of our portfolio, actually 9,000 of our 15,000 units are in a mid to low rise product. And as we are transitioning into out of the the low hanging fruit, if you will, on our energy retrofits, we're looking, this year will be our year to do a very strategic approach to deep energy retrofits in high rises as well. So it is very much on our horizon, and there's already projects like the McNabb project in Hamilton, where they are retrofitting a 200 unit high rise to passive house standard. Once again, tenants are not in there. You are able to do certain things when the tenants are out of that. But we're definitely looking at similar solutions to be able to retrofit our high rises as well.
And Mark, are you familiar with the Manitoba project that was mentioned?
I'm familiar with the builder, not the specific project. It's a terrific, very progressive builder, but we've been in talks actually about doing trying to support a project in Manitoba as well. So we've got to connect the dots there with those folks.
Okay, and does anybody, I don't know about the meet in the stuff that's going on in Seattle, but I have some friends in Seattle that I will follow up and find out about it. Does anybody here have any insight into that? Okay.
No, not familiar with
Okay,
that.
well, with that, I want to thank all our panelists and thank the audience, and stay tuned for more information on this. Keep watching your Passive Buildings Canada newsletter, and we thank you for attending. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.